What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. And you know what time it is? We are doing the College Football Week 8 DFS main slate breakdown. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. We're brought to you by Prize Picks. For new users, they have a first match deposit bonus of up to $100, and they're giving you a free month of Odd Shopper. We have all kinds of tools over at Odd Shopper. Everything you need from sports betting. We've got odds, sides, totals, player props. That's going to help you with a site like Prize Picks. We also have player projections with our DFS package. So you can use those against the listed lines. College football is a part of Prize Picks, something I like to take advantage of, and we've had a lot of success with. But we also have NFL. We have all the major sports. NBA is coming back. NHL is already back. MLB in the postseason, as well as niche sports. So check those out. You must be 21 or older. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. The link is in the video description below. Okay, we have a weird main slate on DraftKings, included some under-the-radar games, which you guys know. Those are some of my favorite. At the end of the video, we're going to rank each of the positions. We'll do top fives. And then I'll try to touch on some FanDuel before we get out of here. But as usual, we'll kick things off with the DraftKings main slate. And we've got a couple bangers on this slate, highlighted by Penn State, Ohio State. Just an amazing real-life game. But for DFS, maybe a little lackluster. These totals were updated as of Thursday, so they may be slightly different in the market come whenever you're watching this. But as of Thursday morning, 5-point spread in favor of Ohio State. The total was 45.5. Both of these teams almost identical in terms of pace. Penn State 76th. Ohio State is 78th. And pass rate a little heavier for Ohio State, but Penn State just played UMass. They've had a couple cupcakes. As far as DFS plays go, I think Drew Aller's a little expensive, averaging just 209 yards per game on 30 attempts. The efficiency isn't great with Drew Aller. He also doesn't run a ton, as you can see, just 79 rush yards. One thing I'll say about that, they played UMass last week, 1 designed attempt. The 2 weeks prior, he had 7 and 5 designed attempts. So I think maybe there's a little more rushing in his bag, but it's still a very hefty price tag for a guy with a 20-point implied team total. So I don't have a lot of interest in Drew Aller. The backfield, these teams have very similar backfields. We're likely looking at committees. With Penn State, it's 2 guys, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Katron was injured recently, so if you're looking at the recent numbers for him, like 6 carries, 9 carries, he's been banged up, so I wouldn't read too much into this. I'm expecting a 50-50 committee between these two. There's not really anything separating them in terms of efficiency or pass game role. It's just a straight 50-50 committee, and they're both going up against a tough defense. So they're GPP plays only, in my opinion. The receiving core, Keandre Lambert-Smith is their number 1. He's now averaging 7.7 targets per game, 67 yards. They throw a ton underneath. So I think there's some PPR equity with KLS, but still probably not a preferred play. Beyond that, they use a ton of 2 tight ends. Their second and third leading target getters are Tyler Warren and Theo Johnson. Recently, we've seen their second receiver, Harrison Wallace, play an elevated role for this team as usual. Bear with me as I scroll for the routes, but he had an increased route share up above 90% in their last game, 96 to be exact, so that's worth mentioning. But otherwise, that wide receiver 3 position is a rotation. You'll see some Dante Cephas, Malik McClain when he's healthy, Liam Clifford, Omari Evans. It's a pretty nasty rotation outside of that. To be honest, I don't anticipate getting a lot of Penn State. These are just the names to know if you're playing tournaments. On the Ohio State side, Kyle McCord is cheaper at 7,200. They have the better implied team total, and they pass more, about a 51% pass rate. So I think he's more interesting than Drew Aller from a ceiling perspective. 275 yards per game on 29 attempts. He's been decently efficient, partially because he has better receivers, but he also takes sacks. He has negative 21 rush yards this year. Another very formidable defense on the other side. Both of these teams are defensive teams this year. So McCord still isn't an ideal play. He'd be in the GPP category. Running back's a complete mess. We've now seen Mayan Williams, Trevion Henderson miss games recently. Chip Trayanum got hurt in their last game. Fourth string running back Dallin Hayden carried the ball 12 times. According to Ryan Day, all of these guys are back at practice. I think the most likely scenario is Trevion Henderson leads a committee with Chip Trayanum, Mayan Williams, and maybe Dallin Hayden functioning as change of pace backs. So at 6,600, I don't have a lot of interest in Henderson. He'd be the GPP guy I get to. And then the backups, unless someone got ruled out or something, I'm not targeting Chip or Mayan or even Dallin Hayden. To play Dallin Hayden, all of the guys listed ahead of him would have to be out. Receiver, Emeka Egbuka is the biggest question. Maybe not on the whole slate, but he's one of the bigger questions on the slate for sure. Apparently he's been practicing, but people that have been there have seen him walking with a limp, which I don't think is encouraging. I do think he tries to gut it out, but at 6,900, I'm not going to play him. The injury risk, the aggravation risk, I think is too high, and there's a chance he just outright sits. Marvin Harrison is 8,400. Pretty expensive on FanDuel. He's a little more affordable at 94. He's going to see probably at least 12 targets in this game. I think 100 yards is likely, but there's still a lot of guys cheaper than him that we can get to. So he's firmly GPP play. I think he's the best one-off in the game, followed by tight end Cade Stover, 70% route rate. No real issues with him. You probably need a touchdown at 5,400. The price tag's still not good, but that's at least worth mentioning. The wide receiver 2 and 3, if Egbuka is out, those targets would go to Julian Fleming and Xavier Johnson, with Carnell Tate operating as a rotational receiver. I just don't have a lot of interest. I question the talent of these guys. The targets weren't great last time out without Egbuka, so it's pretty difficult to get to anyone not named Marvin Harrison in this offense. Game 2, far more palatable game for DFS. We have UCF taking on Oklahoma. 18-point spread as of Thursday morning, 66.5 total, so very clearly an awesome game. UCF, despite being massive underdogs, they have a very fast pace, 26th, and their team total is hovering right around the Penn State-Ohio State marker, so you can see just a far better game environment. It looks like John Rhys Plumlee is going to be back. I don't know what happened in the last game. I played him. I'm sorry to those of you that did. He exited. He came back, exited a second time, said he was 100% in the post-game press conference. I don't know. Doesn't seem like it. And then he's now in a bye week. So I'm anticipating him playing, anticipating full strength. 7,900, I think, is affordable on this slate. Not a cash game play because of the injury risk, but the rushing upside with him is massive. 163 yards, that's basically come in 3 games this year. And then he's been efficient as a passer. Numbers are skewed because of the games he exited. So the 202 yards per game, we're looking probably above 250 median projection in this matchup, assuming they're trailing, playing this fast, and playing to the spread. I like him for tournaments. Backfield is about a 70-30 split in favor of RJ Harvey. They do give a little more receiving work to Johnny Richardson, so that should be noted. I don't think either are particularly strong plays against Oklahoma as big underdogs. Receiving game, when you're using Plumlee, he's pretty easy to stack. You have 2 5K receivers or in that range. Kobe Hudson, Javon Baker. Don't read too much into the 3 combined targets for Hudson over the last 2 games. Still a full-time player, leads the team in routes. I think we can get right back to him. Price adjust-wise, I still would rather play Baker, but it's close. We're splitting hairs. These are the top 2 guys. Xavier Townsend is the 3. Wish he was a little cheaper. I would just find the salary to get to Baker. He does run the ball a little bit, but we're just talking a situational guy here. Tournament only. On Oklahoma, massive team total above 40 points. Dylan Gabriel's still too cheap at 9,300, and a lot of it comes down to the rushing for Gabriel. Here are his designed attempts last 3 games. 9, 6, and 9. We are seeing career high usage in rushing from Gabriel, the likes of which we haven't seen in any of his previous stops, including last year's year with Oklahoma. He's averaging over 300 yards per game. UCF's defense is decent. They're way weaker against the pass. Just an awesome matchup for Gabriel. I think he's a very strong cash play given this team total. They continue to go running back roulette, and I don't have any confidence in this split. For reference, we've now seen Sawchuk, Barnes, Major, and Tawi Walker all lead the backfield in various weeks. They play the hot hand, and a lot of it comes down to how they practice. Last week, Tawi Walker led the backfield. The 2 previous weeks, it was Major. I think they're your best bets, but this is GPP only. No interest in the backs in anything outside of massive tournaments. Barnes hasn't played in 3 games. I think he'll miss this game, but still, best case scenario, we're looking at 3-way committee. Receiver, we did lose Andrell Anthony for the year. Tough, really tough. So now we look at Jaleel Farouk and Drake Stoops as the top two guys. A lot more interest in Farouk for me. Just he's a more explosive receiver. You can see it in the yardage. 415 yards on the year for Farouk, 268 for Stoops. Stoops is like a slot possession receiver. So that's kind of tough to get to. And I'll pull up the routes here. The main beneficiary from the absence, I think, is going to be some combination of Jaden Gibson, Nick Anderson, and Gavin Freeman. I think the best bet is Nick Anderson. The routes the last two games, 59.5%, 44%. Gibson was at 31 and then went down to 14. Gavin Freeman, 14 down to 7. So if I'm making a bet on the wide receiver 3, it's going to be Nick Anderson. The problem, he's 5,200. No price discount on Nick Anderson, so kind of tough to get to him. Honestly, I might rather just go down and play Austin Stogner, their tight end. His routes have been pretty good. You look at the most recent game, Stogner was up at 65%. Not dynamic, but veteran with the team. I think he's probably the guy we get to for very, very cheap plays. Before we move on and before I forget, if you guys want access to this document that you're seeing live on the stream right now, we have it as a part of our Stochastic College Football package. So that way you don't have to pause the video, squint at all these guys. You can just access it yourself, look as long as you want, full screen it, whatever it is. It's available in the package as well as player projections. We have ownership projections, full slate write-ups, all in addition to these videos. So if you want access to that, take advantage of it. The link's in the video description below. I'm the one powering it all, so if you are feeling charitable and want to support me, that is also the best way. And if you've done that, I want to thank you. It does mean a lot. Helps me continue making these videos. So thank you guys very much if you've done that. Third game, Mississippi State, Arkansas. Weird game, 48 total. And we have a 6-point spread in favor of the Razorbacks. These are the two worst teams in the SEC West. Neither team's particularly fast. Mississippi State pass heavy. I should have said this at the beginning of the slate when we talked about Ohio State. This is a late news-driven slate. If you didn't know that by just the Ohio State guys, there's many other players dealing with injuries, and some of them are on Mississippi State. Will Rogers got knocked out of their most recent game. No update. Joe Marks got knocked out of the most recent Mississippi State game. No update. And then we've seen Justin Robinson miss the last two games. He is a receiver for this team who had good opportunity prior to the absence. So we got to watch this Mississippi State stuff. If Mike Wright plays and starts, he's going to be electric. The former Vanderbilt quarterback is amazing rushing the ball. He gets snaps every game in Wildcat stuff, and he already has 138 rushing yards. At 5,200 with his rushing ability, he would be a very good play. I think Will Rogers is going to start and play this game. He has a gnarly consecutive start streak, but we'll see. You're just going to have to wait for late news. I would have a lot more interest in Mike Wright over Will Rogers. It's not the former Mississippi State air raid. So Will Rogers needs a 300-yard bonus. In previous renditions of this team, he almost got it every week. This year, he's averaging 212 yards per game with negative rushing. In the backfield, in addition to missing Joe Marks, Jeffrey Pittman hasn't played recently, so they moved to Seth Davis in their last game. I mean, Joe Marks is the guy when he's healthy. You're just going to have to wait and see if Joe Marks plays. If he doesn't, I think it's a committee and we ignore entirely. If not, Joe Marks is a decent, kind of a overpriced running back play. I won't have a ton of interest regardless. Receiver is also hard to get to for Mississippi State. The rotation hasn't really changed, but the pass rate has. So Lydetrick Griffin, Xavier Thomas, Justin Robinson's been out. We'll see on him. Freddie Roberson, Creed Whitmore, Antonio Harmon, the tight end, Jordan Mosley, Jaden Wally, they all play. I mean, maybe the best option would be Antonio Harmon at the stone minimum. But, I mean, good luck rolling your dice on these. It's going to be very, very greasy if you play one of these guys. I will be mostly fading. Arkansas, KJ Jefferson is just playing behind an awful offensive line. So his sack numbers are way up this year. He's taken 28 sacks. 162 rushing yards is fine for him, but his yards per carry is down below 3 because of the sacks. I mean, he was never a prolific passer, so he kind of relied on this rushing ability to get there. He's a middling price-adjusted play, definitely not a bad play, and this Mississippi State pass rush is maybe the worst in the SEC, so I think the sack numbers are down for him. It's basically the best matchup that KJ Jefferson's going to have the rest of the year. I think, I don't know if like Vandy's on their schedule or something, but This is one of the better matchups they'll have the rest of the way. If you're going to play him, it's maybe the best time. Still nothing more than a middling option. In the backfield, Raheem Sanders is out. They moved to a committee with Rashad Dubinian at the top, AJ Green, change of pace, Dominique Johnson, just a very sparse rotational role. Rashad Dubinian's not a bad play. They're favored by 6. Mississippi State allowing almost 4 yards per carry. I think you could do a lot worse than Dubinian, but just going to be a GPP play. There's a couple other cheap guys I think we can use. Just a name to file away. I'll be using some of him. Probably not a guy I'm super invested in. Receiving rotation. Andrew Armstrong, Isaac Tesla are the two guys that play almost every snap. They ebb and flow with KJ Jefferson. I have a lot more interest in Tesla every week just because of the price. $4,100 versus $6K is a lot more palatable in my opinion. But then beyond that, very gross. The tight end, Ty Washington's played a ton. Fresh off the 7-target game, he only had 1 target. So you're not looking at a locked-in pass game role. He is clearly behind Armstrong and Tesla. And then, interestingly, I'll pull up the routes. I know Tyrone Broden saw his routes cut last week, and that number went down to 45% of the routes. That was the exact same as Jaden Wilson, 45 as well. Last thing on Dubinian, now that I have the routes up, 68% route rate for him. Very clearly the pass catching back. Dubinian, more I look at it, more I think he's a pretty decent play. All right, we move forward. Memphis UAB. This is one of the weird games, the fun games on this slate that we don't typically get. And Memphis is a 6.5-point favorite, 61.5 total. Neither defense is very good. UAB's defense is pathetic. And both teams are fast. Memphis 48th in pace. UAB's 19th. Both teams pass a ton. We're looking at pass rates north of 54%. Hennigan is a very sneaky dual threat quarterback, and he's a value at 8,300. 36 pass attempts per game, 283 yards, and he has 129 rush yards. Nothing crazy, but far cry from negative. Like, he's getting 20 to 30 rushing yards. That's important. And then, I mean, in a matchup like this against UAB's putrid defense, decent chance he hits a 300-yard bonus. Hennigan's a guy I will be overexposed to. Another late news situation, Blake Watson. I'm sorry, guys. If you're a weekday grinder, you know very well that I was very heavy on Blake Watson, as a lot of people were during the week. He carries 5 times and exits with an injury. Listed as day-to-day. This is extremely important because UAB's allowing nearly 6 yards per carry. Blake Watson has been averaging 17.8 touches per game. He is a good pass game role. We've seen this guy with monster target numbers. He's 3rd on the team in targets. I mean, if he's locked in and playing, he's very deserving of this price tag and will be a solid play. Probably not going to play him and Hennigan together still, but very important late news. If he's out, Sutton Smith is the only other running back that touched the ball in their last game. So I think 4K Sutton Smith would be just the stone lock on this slate. Watch this news. I still think Blake Watson plays. Receiving game, Rock Taylor and Demir Blankenship are your top 2. Excellent stacking options with Seth Hennigan. Both are way too cheap. We're talking about Rock Taylor's averaging 84.5 yards per game. Demir Blankenship coming off the monster weekday game, nearly 60 yards per game. These are 2 guys I want to play. Anthony Lanphier at tight end, very good, cheap option at 3,300. He only has 84 yards in the year, but you know he's going to be out there most of the time. The wide receiver 3 is a rotation between Kobe Drake, Joe Skates, and Towski Dove, so not a ton of interest there. UAB, we mentioned it, very fast, very pass-heavy. Jacob Zeno averaging 273 yards through the air per game. Also has 135 rush yards, very similar to Seth Hennigan at a cheaper price. He's the underdog in this game, but as much as I don't think Jacob Zeno is a good player, this offense is just straight up propelling him to really solid fantasy output. 36 attempts per game. I mean, we need to be considering both quarterbacks in this game because of the volume alone. Total's massive. At running back, Isaiah Jacobs is out for the year. I believe it's an ACL. With that, Jermaine Brown has taken over as the full-blown bell cow. He has touch counts of 20 and 19 in the last 2 games, and he's playing almost every down. 7 targets in their last game, a game they lost. That's important. He plays on 3rd down. Jermaine Brown, one of the best running back plays on the slate. We talked about UAB's bad run defense. It's historically bad, but Memphis isn't good either. 4.6 yards per carry allowed to opposing rushers. In the receiving game, this is very tough to parse. I never want to like compare guys to Tyreek Hill. You know what I mean? Like early career Tyreek Hill when he was just blowing up on no routes. But that's kind of what Amari Thomas is doing. Here is route rates: 82%, 42%, 47%. Not a full-time player, but his targets per route run are ridiculous. And you can see it. I mean, he played 47% of the routes and had 12 targets in their last game. I think you can play him. The safer option is Tawan Palmer, who plays a lot more than him. 82% of the routes last game. You even have, beyond that, it's a pretty nasty rotation. These are the two main guys I'm considering. But Fred Ferrier plays a lot as well. Wasn't targeted in the last game. But, he's on the field. So a name that we need to know and probably plays Fred Ferrier at 3,400. Another potential value option. I'm just going to mix and match all three. In a game that's really competitive, I don't see how UAB keeps Amari Thomas off the field more. And he's played like 80% of the routes before. So I think he's still my favorite. All right, going to our next game. Oh, I forgot this was on the slate. Air Force Navy, 10.5 point spread, 34 total. Definitely not one we're hyper focused on for DFS. Two triple option teams, both bottom 3 in pace. Zach Larrier is out of this game. So the quarterback you see on the screen, he's the only one that's thrown a pass. I think Jensen Jones is the guy that's going to take over. He played once the injury occurred. He's 5,400. The problem with Air Force and Navy signal callers is the passing volume. You're basically playing a running back at the quarterback slot or super flex spot, so you are giving up a lot. So, Zach Larrier had 19 carries prior to his absence. That's in Jensen Jones's bag, but he still needs multiple touchdowns and a 100-yard bonus to even compete with some of the elite signal callers, especially when we have Hennigan and Zeno at pretty good prices. So I don't love the QBs in this game. We'll talk about Navy in a second. Where we can go is Emmanuel Michel, 5,800 on DraftKings. This guy is a gnarly workload. Carry counts of 28, 33, 18, 22. Navy's horrible. Air Force is going to run all over this team, whether Larrier plays or not, and he's out. So it's kind of Emmanuel Michel or bust for the entire game. Not playing a pass catcher for either side. For Navy, Ty Lavatai is questionable. I have no idea if he plays. You're not going to hear a lot of injury news on Navy, so it's kind of brutal that they're on the main slate. Without him, Braxton Woodson's going to start. No interest in Navy signal callers. Just play Jensen Jones. If you were even considering Lavatai or Woodson, they also rotate running backs more. So Alex Texa, Daba Fofana, just play Dibinian. Don't play these guys. Western Michigan, Ohio. Another slightly greasy game for the main slate, a MAC game. We don't see this a lot. 17 point spread in favor of the Bobcats, 52.5 total. Western Michigan's running an air raid. They're 24th in pace, and they pass a lot, 49% pass rate. They've been in some blowouts, so don't read too much into this. I think they're going to start Hayden Wolf. I don't know. They've completely just gone full QB roulette. Second most recent game, start Salopek, bench him, Wolf comes in, balls out. Apparently didn't do enough to earn the job. Next game, Bourget starts, benched, Wolf comes in, balls out. They need to play Wolf, but I don't think you can play him. 6,900 is just too expensive for a team that's implied for 17 points. And Hayden Wolf does not run. He has a decent likelihood of getting you negative rushing yards. In the backfield, Jalen Buckley returned from injury, 14 carries. This guy has upside to touch the ball 20 times, but they're massive underdogs here, so I'm not going to completely buy it. I think he's a fine value option. I still think I'd rather get Dubinian or something, but Buckley's a name to know. In softer matchups, he's an absolute smash. The receiving game is interesting. Anthony Sambucci was out of their last contest. So, if he returns, I think it muddles things. Unfortunately, Western doesn't have great injury reporting. So you're going to be gambling with the playing time on these guys. I think the most likely wide receiver rotation is going to be Kenneth Womack up at the top, Malik Didone as the 2, and then Leroy Thomas is the 3. Leroy Thomas is the one that benefits from the Sambucci injury. 36% of the routes. That jumped all the way to 90% in the last game. So that's who I think the 3 wide receiver rotation is going to be. Dudone is the safest, in my opinion, price adjusted. Womack, you have to pay $5,100 for him. And you go down to Dudone, 28.5 yards per game versus 49. I think I'd rather just punt it off with Western Michigan. And then if we get the Sambucci news, you can play Leroy Thomas. Tight end is a rotation. So even Austin Hentz at 33, as you can see, the route rate is 58% on the year. That doesn't ebb and flow a lot. He hasn't eclipsed 65% of the routes in any of the last 4 games. Blake Bosma plays a bit, so I'd still rather play a cheap receiver, in my opinion. Ohio, what they lack in pace, 119th. They make up for in efficiency, and Western has an awful defense. Curtis Rourke at 5,700 flat out might be the best price-adjusted play on the slate. He's also missed time due to injuries. So his efficiency numbers you're seeing on the screen are depressed. He's averaging more than 178 yards per game when you remove the injuries. Rourke, I think, is completely fine. He runs a lot. He's not affected by the ACL from last year, averaging over 4 yards per carry. I mean, he might be just your stone lock cheap cash guy. Like, I think my early cash builds, I don't know what I'm going to do, or if I'm even going to play cash, but just if you're running 2 QBs, I would be really tempted to do like Rourke, Gabriel, and then have Hennigan, Zeno as very close options behind them if you like can't find the salary for Gabriel or something. Backfield's a 50-50 committee. Say Bangura, O'Shane Allison. Allison's a way better price-adjusted play, even though Bangura's been more efficient. They've been in close games. They lost to NIU recently, and Bangura did not assume the full feature back role he had last year. So I'd just rather play Allison, GPP only. Receiver is very easy to get to. You have Sam Wiglitz. He's the premier stacking option. Number 2 is Miles Cross. I think I'd rather just pay down for Cross at this point. Not a lot separates them in terms of targets. So that's worth noting. And then I'll pull up the wide receiver 3 routes. I'm not confident in just speaking to this offhand, so this will help. Last game, we saw Tyler Walton, 73% of the routes. That matches up with the targets here. Tyler Foster is the main tight end, but he splits time with Will Kasmerick. I think Foster is the better price-adjusted play at 3,400. 8 targets in the last game. He's seeing more of the role recently over Kasmerick. But Tyler Walton at 3,800, I think, is firmly in play with that route share above 70%. Washington State, Oregon, 62 total, 20-point spread. 2 good offenses. Washington State, they definitely need a bounce back, but their offense is conducive to it. 25th in pace, 59% pass rate. Cam Ward's averaging 295 yards per game on 35 attempts. Definitely not a good matchup, but he's also running a fair amount, more than he ever has in his career. He has 30 designed attempts this year, which is really good. So Ward at 8,800, I'd still rather play Gabriel. I'd rather play Hennigan, Zeno, price adjusted. But you can get to Ward in tournaments. No issues with that. Am a little worried about the matchup. Backfield's a 3-way committee. Nakia Watson, Jalen Jenkins, Dylan Payne. No thank you. We saw Lincoln Victor return, about a 50% route share. You'd imagine that number rises. So my anticipation is your main 3 receivers are Kyle Williams. This must be an error. 2 guys must have the name Kyle Williams. So excuse me, I'll fix the price on him. Anyway, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I think any of these guys are playable, assuming Kyle Williams isn't like 7K or something. But anyway, I'll fix that. Kyle Williams, Josh Kelly, Lincoln Victor, they're the main 3 receivers for this team. Victor, again, I think comes right back up in terms of routes. The wide receiver 4 is going to be a split between Carlos Hernandez, Isaiah Hamilton, and then they use tight ends. Billy Revere, Cooper Mathers is expected to return. So it should be a nasty rotation beyond those top 3. And again, sometimes just I don't notice the naming convention errors until it's too late if I'm making the video. My apologies. Bo Nix in Oregon, 9,800. Love Bo Nix. 291 yards per game on 34 attempts, 101 rushing yards. We finally saw him used more as a rusher last game. 4 designed attempts. Washington State needs to be competitive to coax a full ceiling out of him, like a rushing ceiling we saw last year. Last year, Bo Nix had 14 rushing scores and over 500 yards. They were in more competitive games right out of the gate, and there will be more to come. So I'm not sure if this is the slate we just pony up for Bo Nix, but he's definitely in play for tournaments. Bucky Irving came in with 21 carries and 7 targets in that most recent game against Washington. Like Nix, he needs to be pushed. If he's not, you'll see Jordan James involved in a timeshare. Jordan James still had 11 carries last game for what it's worth. But Bucky Irving, man, he's explosive. He's expensive, though, so that should be noted. Tournament play, in my opinion. The receiving rotation, Troy Franklin's the one. It's confusing beyond that. A lot of you played Gary Bryant last week, myself included. Let me just show you what Gary Bryant had done and then what he did. Gary Bryant, he had not fallen below 65% of the routes in any game. He'd been above 70 in 3. He'd been above 82 in 2 of the last 4. And then the last game, he drops down to 30 randomly. My apologies, man. I got burned on Gary Bryant. I did not see this role changing that much, but it did. And with that, Tez Johnson, he went from a 30% route share to a 79. Trayshawn Holden, he's been consistently in the 60s, so his role didn't change. But we essentially saw Tez Johnson come up and play right over Gary Bryant. I don't know if this continues or not, but that's what happened. I'll let you guys decide if you want to play this weird rotation. Honestly, with the prices, I just think Holden's the safest with the 60% routes beyond Troy Franklin. But I don't know. I could see them using Bryant, Tez, Holden in any combination as the wide receiver 2-3. I'm still going to gamble on it. The team is really, really good, and the team total is massive. So I'll have exposure to all of Tez, Holden, and Bryant. Tight ends rotate. No interest for me there. Tennessee, Bama. Man, was this game sick last year. This year, it has a 48 total. Both teams lost their QBs. It is what it is. Bama is an 8-point favorite over Tennessee. The Vols are 8th in pace, passing 44% of the time. Alabama's much slower, 88th in pace, 41% pass rate. Joe Milton's been really disappointing, and he's pretty expensive on this slate. So 7,700, I'd rather just find the salary for Hennigan or go down to Zeno. 210 yards per game is awful. Efficiency-wise, he's throwing 30 times per game, so there's no excuse for him being this bad. He runs a little bit, 173. So tournaments, don't hate it, don't love it. Receiving game, Squirrel White, Ramel Keaton are your top 2. And interestingly, they used Chaz Nimrod as the 3. Another thing I got wrong last week, I thought it would be Dante Thornton coming back from injury. It was not. Chaz Nimrod was the lead receiver for this team. 3,400, you can use him for sure. He's basically the play we wanted to use last week with Dante Thornton. Incorrectly identified by myself. Running backs, 3-way committee. Jalen Wright leads it. Jabari Small second. Dylan Sampson third. They all 3 get work. They are prioritized in that order. In better matchups, you have a lot more interest in them. For example, Jalen Wright had 19 carries last game, but we've also seen him as low as 4. Bama has an excellent run defense, and the total's very low in this game, so no interest for me there. On the Bama side, Jalen Milroe, it's the same problem we've had the last couple weeks. His designed attempts just aren't high enough. 139 rush yards is not enough to play him at 8,400. He just doesn't do enough as a passer. He's only throwing 22 times per game. So when he gets designed rush attempts of 3, 1, 5, it's just not going to cut it. I've chased the Jalen Milroe train too much for DFS. Hasn't gotten there, and at this point, I thought it might change in competitive games. It hasn't. We just need to see it before we can play Milroe. Backfield, Jace McClellan, about a 70-30 split over Roydell Williams. He's a middling price play on DraftKings. FanDuel, he's really cheap at 6,200, so that's probably the place you want to look at him. But this offensive line is just not very good. Tennessee is a good D-line. It's a bad matchup for McClellan. The receiving game is a pretty nasty rotation. Bond and Burton are your top 2. Amari Niblack has played a lot recently, but he's like a tight end receiver hybrid. CJ Dippry's been in and out of games, so I hesitate to just lock in Niblack. When Dippry was playing, we saw Niblack at route rates of 34% and 45%. With the injury, he's been up at 74 and 63. So I'm worried that we see this role drop for Niblack. At the same time, he's 3,500 and he's played really well. So maybe it would behoove them to keep Niblack on the field. But focusing on Burton Bond won't have a lot of these guys. Moving forward, Wisconsin, Illinois, my best advice is to just ignore this game for the most part. 2.5-point spread, 41.5 total. Braden Locke is going to start. He's the former 4-star Mississippi State recruit, transfers to Wisconsin. We have no sample on him, but he couldn't beat out Mordecai, who's not good. Don't play Locke unless, I don't know, you have a different read than me, but I'm not doing it. Braylon Allen has a monster workload. You're going to see this guy touch the ball at least 20 times. So as a contrarian pay-up option, you can use him. Illinois' defense doesn't scare you. Their weakness is the secondary, but they haven't been great up front either. And I don't know if Wisconsin can even throw over this secondary. So Braylon Allen, sure. At receiver, I don't know if their pass rate changes with Locke. They're still favored. So there's a chance they just go straight ground and pound. That might affect Pauling, DK, Green, CJ Williams. If you want to throw a dart, it's Bryson Green for me. Coming off 8 targets, route rate north of 70%. he's 3,700. So you could do worse than Bryson Green, but I'm worried about this Wisconsin team. And I have questions about their offensive philosophy moving forward. Illinois is fast. They're 17th in pace. Like, I might play a greasy over in this game because of the 39th ranked Wisconsin pace and 17th ranked Illinois. But Wisconsin's defense has been decent. Luke Altmaier has been pretty bad, only 200 yards per game, 6,400. I imagine he's not going to be the preferred cheap option this week, as he has been in the past. But he runs. It's about the best thing we can say. Reggie Love might be back here. That would be really big news for this slate, because then we probably see a committee between him and Caden Fegan. Last week, Caden Fegan had 18 carries. 18 carries. And he played on almost every single pass down. He has 6 combined targets over the last 2 games. He's very much in play as a cheap option. I think he's my favorite one, Dubinian being second. But it's reliance on the Reggie Love news. Again, like a lot of other situations, injury dependent. Late news dependent. Receiver, Isaiah Williams just gets so many targets. Double-digit targets in 3 of the last 4. Really inefficient, but 78 yards per game. He's got a monster floor. He's still not expensive enough. I imagine he'll be a fringe cash play, probably popping projections a ton. He is somewhat viable. Pat Bryant and Casey Washington are the 2-3. They rotate tight ends. Nothing for me in the pass game beyond Williams. Minnesota, Iowa, 3.5-point spread, 31.5 total. If Darius Taylor returns, I'd have some interest, but they already got him hurt, giving him that monster Mo Ibrahim workload. It's a hamstring too, so it's not like an injury that is a clear cut and dry timeline for return. So I'm worried about Darius Taylor. And also Zach Evans has played well in his stead. So I think maybe you get more of a committee. I'm not playing a pass catcher or Kaliakmanis. For Iowa, Deacon Hill is maybe the worst quarterback in the country. He is a completion percentage below 40%, negative rushing yards. I was trying to figure out the lowest I've ever projected a quarterback for on the DraftKings main slate without a timeshare. He projects barely above 6 fantasy points. This is full rebate. You should get like 5,000. You should get his price tag. In addition, like he should be $0 and you should get 5,500 for playing him. Deacon Hill is horrific. Maybe you can play a greasy runner. Minnesota doesn't have a good run defense. They're 4.5 yards per carry allowed to opposing backs. LaShawn Williams, 24 carries. This is the only guy I'm playing. Him and maybe Darius Taylor. X out the game otherwise. Like you could very well do that and not feel bad. Oklahoma State, West Virginia, 3.5-point spread, 50 total. Oklahoma State, 35th in pace, 55% pass rate. West Virginia is the polar opposite, 124th in pace, 36% pass rate. Alan Bowman has been fine. He orchestrates the offense well enough to keep them competitive in games and drive opportunity to all the skill players, but I don't think he's viable on his own. He doesn't run. His efficiency as a passer is not good, but they just throw so much that it kind of like gives him enough to propel the skill players to a spot where you might want to play him. Anyway, Ollie Gordon has one of the best roles in the country right now. He's coming off a 36-touch game, 7 targets, 29 carries. West Virginia plays pretty good defense, especially up front. Their weakness is in the secondary, but at some point, like the opportunity is just too good for Gordon. He's a really good play on FanDuel at 9K. DraftKings, it's a little tougher to decide. He's like close to Braylon Allen and Bucky Irving. But yeah, I still have no issues playing him there. Main 3 wide receivers, Brennan Presley, Rashad Owens, and Jaden Bray. Bray still played a ton, even though he only had 1 target. You can still play Bray. I think I'm still going down to Rashad Owens if I'm playing anyone for this team. Just price adjusted, he comes out the best. But you no longer have Rashad Owens at 3,500, so he's still tougher to click. Garrett Green's another excellent play on this slate. Very good on FanDuel, too. 8,800 is very affordable. He runs a ton, man. Like Garrett Green, 9 design attempts last game, 231 yards. Oklahoma State's defense is awful. And he actually had a 300-yard passing game, so we know it's in his bag if he's tested. I think he's an excellent play on FanDuel, and he's a pretty strong price-adjusted play on DraftKings. CJ Donaldson leads a committee, and you're never going to see him with like a 70% workload. They just run too much. You can't have a running back carrying that much. So 18.2 touches per game is awesome for Donaldson. Very much in play. Jalen Anderson and Jaheim White are the change of paces. Not a ton of interest there. Among receivers, they had a couple guys quit. So Devin Carter, 11 targets last game. Cole Taylor, 8. He's their tight end. I still hesitate. because when they lead in games, you're live to get a game with like 20 pass attempts. Like last game, you guys saw it was a weekday. They end up losing to Houston, but man, that was a up and down, back and forth game. If I'm playing anyone not named Carter or Taylor, it would be Hudson Clement, 88% route share last game. The other thing that's interesting is Traylon Ray, 79% of the routes, 3,500. Maybe you could get to him, but even that massive route share only amounted to 4 targets. Pretty tough. Texas-Houston, 61.5 total, 23.5 point spread in favor of the Longhorns. Texas 52nd in pace, Houston 33rd. Houston passes a bit more. Quinn Ewers is 8,600. He doesn't run a ton, but he is averaging 282 through the air. When teams have massive implied team totals and your quarterbacks pass enough to get a 300-yard bonus decently often, they're in my player pool. Not like a cash play or anything, but Houston's defense isn't good. Quinn Ewers, he's difficult to play when he's under pressure a lot, but Houston does not have a pass rush. You can look to Quinn Ewers for tournaments. Jonathan Brooks, he's up there with like Ollie Gordon, Braylon Allen, and Price, and he deserves it, averaging 120 rushing yards per game. And then his receiving workload's been monstrous, another 20 yards there, coming off a 6-target game against OU. Just still too cheap, shockingly. Receiver is very clear. It's Worthy 1, AD Mitchell 2, and I think maybe even Jatavian Sanders rivals AD Mitchell for 2 when he's healthy. Now had the bye. Again, he got rolled up on in their third, I guess it was their second most recent game, but then against Oklahoma, 70% of the route, so he wasn't quite at his full output. Another week removed from the injury should help Sanders. Great play. He's so cheap on FanDuel. You can play him there without a doubt. Houston, Donovan Smith's a bit expensive. I would rather play a lot of guys we already talked about at cheaper or similar prices. He's averaging 267 through the air per game on 37 attempts. Somewhat mobile. He has 196 rush yards. Pretty good designed attempt numbers coming off an 8-carry game that's designed. Still, really tough matchup against Texas. Good secondary for Texas. I'm not too interested. Backfield, full committee, Parker Jenkins, Stacey Snead, Tony Mathis, occasionally Brandon Campbell. No, thank you. Matthew Golden looks like he's going to play. Got his groin a little banged up last game. Their 3-receiver set is Samuel Brown, Matthew Golden, and Joseph Manjack. Stephon Johnson, the Oklahoma State transfer, played really well when Golden went down, so maybe you even see them rotate a little more. They're all a little expensive for my liking. I would rather just pass on Houston unless it's a run back to a Texas stack. All right, that's the DraftKings main slate. I'm going to do the top 5s per position first, and then we'll talk a little bit about the FanDuel exclusive games. So just excuse me for 1 second while I pull up my notes on these guys when I adjusted for ranks. I know we're in riveting radio talk, but I forgot to do this ahead of time, so I am sorry. But I'll stall for just 1 more second, and we'll pull it up. All right, got it. So, shocker to no one, this is kind of what I anticipated. The top 2 quarterback plays are Curtis Rourke and Dylan Gabriel. This was my intuition for cash games. I think you just play these guys. Rourke at 57, 17-point favorites over Western Michigan. Runs, speaks for itself. Gabriel running more than he ever has in his career, just like an absolute monster ceiling week in, week out. Beyond that, we actually have Jensen Jones ranked as the 3rd best price-adjusted play for Air Force, which I understand, but with Jensen Jones, I wouldn't personally put him in my top 5 because you have a very narrow range of outcomes as a Armed Force signal caller. So I'll skip ahead of him, and I'll go to Bo Nix, Garrett Green, Seth Hennigan, and Jacob Zeno as the next 4. Broke them down. You've got mobility with all of them. A couple good game environments, especially the Memphis UAB game. Both those signal callers pass a ton, run a ton. Think they're completely fine. For running back, top 5 here, we kick things off with, sorry, I accidentally exited out. Jonathan Brooks is number 1. Just monster workload, price adjusted, good volume, nothing really to poke holes in there. It's interesting he gets a slight edge over Bucky Irving and Braylon Allen and Blake Watson and Ollie Gordon, probably because of the team total against Houston's bad run defense. But from there, number 2 is Rashad Dubinian, just very cheap, playing ahead of the other backs, and we don't have Rocket Sanders. Jermaine Brown, number 3, makes sense. You have no Isaiah Jacobs. 4 is Irving. 5 is Caden Fagan, the Illinois cheap back. We go down to pass catchers, receivers. Number 1, price adjusted. All right, this makes sense. It's a couple of the shootouts. Demir Blankumsey, 4,700, coming off the monster game. Rashad Owens is 2 at 4,800. 3 is Miles Cross. 4 is Drake Stoops, and 5 is Chaz Nimrod. These are just values, so price-adjusted values. If you're looking for studs to target, we have Xavier Worthy, Troy Franklin, and then we go down to, man, it's a lot of mid-price guys. So probably not playing like a Marvin Harrison. If you go way up there, it prefers Troy Franklin over anyone else. And I guess that makes sense with the Washington State shootout. But all right, let's talk a bit of FanDuel before we head out of here. How are we doing on time? 45 minutes. All right, I'll try to give you a good 10 minutes on this. So this game is not on FanDuel. Texas Tech BYU. TCU Kansas State is. It's also on the DraftKings night slate. We'll focus on FanDuel for this. 6.5 point spread in favor of Kansas State. 60 totals, a very good FanDuel game. Problem is you got two backup quarterbacks playing a ton. Josh Hoover, 9,200. I would rather go elsewhere on this slate. But Imani Bailey, this was something that stood out to me doing projections for FanDuel. He's coming off a 13-carry game. I mean, this guy's averaging 21 touches per game. What a buy low we have on Imani Bailey on FanDuel. 107 rushing yards per game for him. Good pass game role. Yes, please. Receiver's a nasty, nasty rotation. I think you either get to J.P. Richardson or Savion if you're stacking, but I honestly don't think I'm going to have a lot of Josh Hoover stacks. Kansas State is really hard because they platooned Will Howard and Avery Johnson. They're both going to play here. Neither are in play at their prices. Trayshawn Ward actually outcarried and had more routes than DJ Giddens. So throw a dart on Trey Ward on FanDuel, completely fine at 7,300. Receiving game, all these guys are cheap, and two players in particular you should look at. Ben Sano, somebody corrected me on the pronunciation and I forgot. So my apologies, Ben, and whoever you were in the chat, I forgot. But leading the team in receiving yards, he's 6,700. And then last thing for this team, Keegan Johnson fully iced RJ Garcia last week. Garcia had like 5% of the routes. Keegan Johnson, full-time player. You need a cheapie on FanDuel, 5,200. Only problem, this pass rate plummeted under Avery Johnson. So I hesitate to play any Kansas pass catchers. Michigan State, gross game overall. I'm not playing any Michigan State guys. The only guy that was in play was Nate Carter. And Jalen Berger returned and siphoned off a decent amount of work. So that's an issue for me. Very tough defense for them on the other side. Plus, Michigan will be stealing their signal, so they'll know what's coming. If you know, you know. On the Michigan side, J.J. McCarthy, 9,300. He's a middling play. He needs Michigan State to keep this competitive to coax the ceiling out of him. Only 216 yards per game. That's what you're going to get unless Michigan State keeps it closer than the 24-point spread. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. This is like your Katron Allen, Nick Singleton backfield on the night slate, on the FanDuel slate. Corum's a bit expensive on FanDuel. Edwards is more palatable at 5,900, but I'd rather just like find my way up to Imani Bailey. For reference, there's just so many bell cows that are underpriced on FanDuel. I'm not going to mess with a timeshare in Michigan with an unknown workload. Same thing with receivers. They need to be pushed. Rowan Wilson, Cornelius Johnson, Colston Loveland. There's others I would rather play in their price ranges. Duke FSU. Duke hinges on Riley Leonard's status. I don't know if he's going to play. They use a running back committee, Waters, Moore, splitting. Jordan Moore and Jalen Calhoun are pretty good plays. Still a tough matchup. Still dealing with a hurt quarterback. So I think I'd rather go elsewhere on FanDuel. Duke also has a 17 implied team total, so really low on this slate. They will provide a very difficult matchup for Florida State. This is good and bad. It's going to be hard for Florida State to score as many points as they have been. But then maybe you get guys like Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson in full route shares, which doesn't happen all the time when they blow teams out. Travis is pretty expensive on FanDuel, so he's not a preferred play for me, but good dual threat ability, good efficiency. He's gotten hurt and played through it in like 4 straight games, so I'm a little worried on the longevity for Travis long-term. Those of you with futures on Florida State, man, hope he's not taking more hits from Duke. Backfield's a 3-way committee, no interest there. But we've got Johnny Wilson priced down, both on the DraftKings night slate and on FanDuel, 8,100. The route rate doesn't look good here, but when you isolate games where Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson played together, no difference in terms of route share. Johnny Wilson actually averages more yards per game on almost the same targets. These guys should both be 9K, so you're getting a price discount on Wilson. His absence last week was by all means precautionary. Utah USC 7-point spread in favor of the Trojans. Bryson Barnes is going to start here. I just don't think he's good enough to play on a slate like this. There's opportunity cost. FanDuel has a couple of these guys that are really cheap at 7,200, but that means you can't play like Caleb Williams or someone else who just has a monster ceiling. The backfield, Jaquindon Jackson, 22 carries. He split time with the safety, Sion Vaki. For those of you on DraftKings, he's not on the slate, but he is on the FanDuel slate. USC's defense is so bad where I'm going to play both these guys. 6,500 for Jackson, 5.5K for Vaki. Play them both. Not together, but you can play them both for sure. Do not play a Utah receiver with this quarterback situation, even against USC. Caleb Williams is prohibitive on FanDuel, so he's not a preferred play. We know he's going to likely get 300 yards, even in a tough matchup. The one thing I'll say here is the total's way lower than it typically is for Caleb Williams. So while 300 yards is probably the most likely outcome, it might be tougher for him to get there. He doesn't run enough to overcome it. Backfield's a committee, Lloyd and Jones. Receiver has seen some consolidation to Brendan Rice and Taj Washington, but you get no price discount for them. The one guy who might be worth playing is Zachariah Branch coming off the injury. 40% of the routes, he's playing more and more. He's just by far their best receiver when you watch him on the field. A couple other games, Clemson, Miami for the FanDuel slate, 3-point spread in favor of Clemson. It's Shipley or pass for this Clemson team. 7,700 is a good price tag. He's averaging 19 touches per game. For Miami, Van Dyke is decently priced, but he's going to need a 300-yard bonus. The total's low at 48.5. Clemson plays good pass defense. There's better slates to play Van Dyke. Running backfield's a committee, 3 ways. No interest there. And while A.J. Allen has 2 carries, the guy's been running a ton of routes, so that's a problem. He plays on third downs. Receiving game, it's Restrepo, George, and they benched Colby Young, not for one player in particular, but Brashard Smith, Isaiah Horton, and Tyler Harrell all played. It's a George or Restrepo or pass. They're all a little expensive for me. Ole Miss and Auburn, 6.5-point spread in favor of Ole Miss. This game has a 54 total, which is pretty good. Dart is really expensive on this slate, but he's hyper mobile, 302 yards. I think he's an interesting contrarian option, but he's not going to be a preferred play. Judkins is way too cheap. He's carried the ball 33 times and 18 times. This is why I can't get behind like a Nate Carter. Like Donovan Edwards. Like, am I really going to pass up on Judkins or Amani Bailey in the mid 8Ks? The answer is absolutely not. Playing a ton of Judkins. Receivers tough. We saw Zachariah Franklin Jeepers. Zachariah Franklin missed their last game. That allowed them to consolidate all the routes basically to Jordan Watkins, Dayton Wade, Trey Harris, and Caden Prieskorn. You'll have to watch the status of Zachariah Franklin, but if he's out, you've got some pretty affordable options in those 4. Auburn is a complete pass for me. I have no interest in any of their ball carriers, none of their pass catchers, neither of their signal callers. This is just a full opportunity cost play. No reason to play an Auburn guy. Last one for FanDuel, South Carolina, Missouri. 7-point spread in favor of Missouri. 60 total. Great game. And it's not on DraftKings at all. Spencer Rattler, he's a wizard. What he's done under the pressure he sustained is mind-blowing. Averaging 285 per game, and he has one of the worst O-lines in college football. He also is running a bit. So Rattler, 9,500, I would say is almost fair price-adjusted play. You can play him if you want. Tough matchup. Missouri's got a good secondary. Looks like Mario Anderson's going to give it a go. The guy's been banged up, so his carry counts are skewed 26 to 10 to 20. Semi-competitive spread, so I think you could still play Anderson. I'd rather get to like Bailey or Judkins, but he's in play. No Antwain Wells, so that sets up Xavier Legette as our locked-in wide receiver 1. Omega Blake is your 2, but I think there's other cheaper guys you can get to. For reference, like Squirrel White is really cheap on FanDuel, so he would be like one of the preferred guys for Tennessee. Hard for me to play South Carolina guys, but Missouri guys are cheap. Brady Cook, he's come up in price. Still an elite ceiling, so a tournament play, sure. Cody Schrader, if he plays, is a monster, and I think he's going to. He keeps getting the questionable tag, but the guy's a warrior and playing through it. 19 carries in the last game coming off the questionable tag. 4 targets. He's averaging almost 100 all-purpose yards per game. You can play Schrader in this matchup. And then lastly, Luther Burden, he's 10K on FanDuel, but man, 11.5 targets per game over the last 4. Nothing bad to say about Burden. And you have Theo Weiss, Mookie Cooper. They're locked into 3 receiver sets, so value plays galore. That'll do it for us. Hope you guys enjoyed the FanDuel breakdown. Really tried hard to squeeze it in this week. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you would suggest. 2 suggestions that we've incorporated were FanDuel and the top 5s per position. So if you've got one, reach out to me. The better way to do so is honestly on Twitter too. Just DM me at Matt_Gajewski. I see those quicker. Otherwise, yeah, let me know what you guys think. And good luck. We'll talk to you again next week. and we will see you later. Have a good one.